I can hear that song and be taken to a very specific point in time. And I feel like that's the amazing thing about music in general, and like all these songs we've been talking about, is how much it is a time machine.
This is Life in 7 Songs from the San Francisco Standard. I'm Sophie Behrman. This week's guest is Kris Bowers, a pianist, Emmy-winning composer, and one of the most in-demand musical storytellers working today. If you've cried watching King Richard, or you've swooned over Bridgerton, or if you felt unexpectedly moved by an animated robot's emotional arc in The Wild Robot, well then, you've already experienced Kris's work. Kris has a gift for making us feel through music, translating unspoken emotion into sound. And it's a goal he's been working towards his entire life. Arguably since before he was born. His parents, neither of whom received more than a high school education, wanted their son to have great opportunities in life, and their chosen avenue for that was the piano. Kris's story could have gone a different way. He could have grown resentful of the rigorous musical training his parents put him through, but Kris fell deeply in love with music, even when that love pulled him away from the path his parents imagined, choosing jazz and improvisation over the classics. That instinct to find his own voice, to seek emotion over rules, has been the key to his success. And I feel especially lucky to be talking to Kris right now because the new season of Bridgerton premieres this Thursday, and I am a big fan. Kris Bowers, thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, really appreciate it.
So your parents wanted you to learn the piano. How did they arrive at that?
You know, it's funny. I didn't know this until relatively recently, but my dad told me that when my mom was pregnant with me, my dad was driving and heard a piece of piano music, and it made him emotional. And my dad is not an emotional guy. And that took him by surprise. And so he told my mom he wanted me to play piano after hearing that music. For them, me playing piano was a way for me to access spaces that they couldn't afford to put me in, essentially. For them, it was highly important because they wanted me to go to school, they wanted me to achieve, but they also felt like, you know, once you turn 18, my dad's famous line was, "This will always be home, but you don't live here anymore," essentially. And so I think, you know, for them, it was like, you have to have a plan. And so this is also in the era of the Williams sisters, Venus and Serena, being, you know, starting to come onto the scene, or Tiger Woods coming onto the scene. And there are these Black families who, in that time period, I feel like there was this strong effort to make sure that your Black kids did not fall through the cracks, essentially. My parents were so concerned about that they were like, we need to put you in something that will help you stay focused and strive and try to achieve something.
I can imagine that there were probably periods of time where maybe resentment brewed a little bit, like, you chose this, not me. But then was there a moment where you took it over and you were like, oh no, this fuels me, it feeds me?
Yeah, 100%. It was definitely around middle school that happened for me, because when I was younger, it was just kind of like Suzuki style learning and learning what the keys on the piano were. And then when I was about 8, I was starting to feel less interested in it. And my parents decided to put me into jazz lessons as well. And that was a big shift for me because all of a sudden it became more fun. And it was also about expression. It was less about like, play these notes and get them right or else, or like this kind of like test feeling, and you could fail the test. And I started to realize that this was a way for me to express these feelings I couldn't express verbally. That connection is what started this thing where like they didn't have to tell me to practice, because it became more of a like a necessity for me to process emotions. It's funny because I started playing piano when I was about 4, and My dad sat behind me every day while I practiced for years.
Wow.
And he'd pick me up from school and he'd be like, here are 3 songs I heard on the radio today that I think you should check out. Then when I was graduating high school, I told them I wanted to go to a conservatory. And then they were like, wait. We actually just wanted you to do piano to get into a good school to do something else. Like, we actually want you
that
to
wasn't the plan.
yeah. Like, this is so you can get a scholarship to be a lawyer, not so that you can actually be a musician. And I just happened to fall in love with it myself and get good at it that it turned into this bigger thing.
And I understand that it was when you were about 12 that you realized you wanted to compose music for films specifically. And there was a song that played a role in that realization. Tell me about that.
When I was 12, I had started, I was a freshman at LA County High School for the Arts. I had fallen deeply in love with playing music, and my dad was a huge film lover. We went to movies every weekend, pretty much, watched movies like multiple times a week at home, and he was always sharing his collection with me, and we bonded mutually over John Williams unexpectedly because he loved Star Wars and Indiana Jones and those movies of his era. And I was loving Home Alone and E.T. and Jurassic Park. Mm-hmm. And so I have a core memory of listening to John Williams' scores, specifically Jurassic Park, and at some point realizing that I felt the same emotional swells that I did watching the movie just listening to the score.
I mean, it's not often that we have a music composer on the show, someone who can really explain, what the music is doing for us. Can you put into words what makes that theme so incredible?
One of the things I always say about John Williams, any theme you can sing from a movie, it's most likely John Williams. And I feel like that's still the case because he finds this incredible balance of having a melody like ba-da-da, just those 3 notes at the beginning of the melody become this signifier for us that if we just hear those 3 notes played in a certain way, we know that that's Jurassic Park. The other magic about John Williams that I've always loved, that I figured out as I got older, is that there's all this like work that's happening under the surface that is more felt than heard. It's not just a melody and chords. There's the choir that's doing something slightly different than the melody. There's like some other movement inside the orchestra that has this like motor happening. There's all these counter melodies that are happening. There's all this stuff that's contributing to how we feel about it emotionally that is just in the orchestration. And so his ability to have clear singable melodies and write them in a way that we feel moved by immediately, and then have all this other stuff happening underneath, I think is what makes it feel emotional.
You also chose Earth, Wind, and Fire's Reasons, which is connected to your parents. How would you listen to that tune? Paint a picture for me.
Yeah, so every weekend, to this day, my mom every Sunday makes brunch for, our family. And usually my mom would be in the kitchen, and my dad had this record collection. He had this turntable, and the record collection kind of stayed put in the closet until Sundays for some reason. But it became this ritualistic thing where like I'd come downstairs and they'd already be cooking and my dad would already be playing music. There'd be stacks of records on the floor. And, some song would come on. They'd be like, oh, Kris, you don't know nothing about this. Like, and they started singing to whatever song it was, or, oh, like back in our day, this was the jam. And like, I would learn about like Luther Vandross or Stevie Wonder or all these different artists through not only listening to the music, but also their expression of what it meant to them. And so this Earth, Wind, and Fire song is one of those things where it was not just like, oh, listen how great the song was. It's like, no, this song is like the purest expression of love that you can imagine. My dad literally said to me that you don't know love unless you know all the words to this song.
Did you sort of glean like the power that music has over us through the lyrics or through the way it's...
Yes, because my parents are not the most like lovey-dovey, like affectionate people. And listening to songs like this was the most in love I ever saw them. And also like pretty often, actually, now that I think about it, my dad singing love songs to my mom just made her swoon in this way where it was just like, I felt like I was seeing a younger version of them as well. And like this like really deeply in love romantic version of them. And for music to have the power to like change how these two individuals interact on a regular basis, I think was pretty profound.
Absolutely. You mentioned that around middle school, music helped you express some emotions that were hard to express in words. And I think your next song connects with that feeling. It's NSYNC's God Must Have Spent a Little More Time on You.
Yeah, for a big shift. Yeah, I feel like I just was like a hopeless romantic at a very young age. I remember in fourth and fifth grade buying girls like stuffed animals and not even knowing why or like what I was expecting. Just like this romantic gesture is the thing to do. And so when I got to middle school, I went from this elementary school that was like a pretty safe, like quiet environment to a middle school that had like a couple thousand kids, and there were fights in my middle school like pretty much every day. I remember just being nervous I was going to get into a fight or be beat up like almost every day of my middle school experience until I discovered this tool with music where I realized that like these kids that like I feel not comfortable around, even though like most of them look like me, if I learn our music and share that with them, I'll earn some cool points essentially. And so I would learn songs from the radio and play them for these classmates of mine, and then all of a sudden became like, oh, Kris is the homie, like so tell him what song you want, and like tomorrow he'll be able to play it. And like all of a sudden I became like, I had this social currency through music in a way that made music feel so much more valuable to me because it was a way to connect to these people in a different way. And so this NSYNC song is one of those songs where like both the part of me that was the hopeless romantic would like listen to it, imagining singing it to this like imaginary girl that I wasn't even like talking to essentially. And also this idea that like, oh, if I play this, like these other kids will notice and will respond to that, and they know this song.
Your soul is like a secret that I never could keep. When I look into your eyes, I know that it's true. God must have spent a little more time on you.
When I was a kid, my parents didn't want me to listen to like present day pop music because they were just nervous about messages and things that were being said in it and all that kind of stuff. And so I think the other reason why I loved NSYNC is because my parents were like, NSYNC is just doing Boys to Men. Like this has been done before essentially. You know, NSYNC is using all of the New Jack Swing producers and like all these producers that were producing like all this black music at the time. And so I think they were okay with me listening to it because they would recognize that the production of them was actually really great because it was the same producers that was producing all the music they were listening to.
I love that we can now pop from NSYNC to Oscar Peterson.
Yeah, exactly.
one of the greatest jazz pianists of all time. And you chose Roundalay. And I think you got to meet Oscar Peterson when you were 12. Yeah. So can you tell that story?
So I had this amazing jazz teacher named Kenny Davis as a drummer that played with Oscar a little bit, and he knew I loved Oscar Peterson. Like when I first heard Oscar Peterson, I was floored, and I immediately decided to make it my mission to like learn everything I could about his playing. And so Kenny invited me to the Hollywood Bowl to hear their sound check before the concert. And Oscar was late for the sound check, and so I got to play on his Bosendorfer piano, and it was like this pretty crazy experience playing on the Hollywood Bowl stage with his band on his piano. And then they brought him in. He had just had a stroke, and so he was in a wheelchair and didn't have all his faculties, but was still relatively cognitively present. And so Kenny introduced us, and I told him how big of a fan I was, and I played this piece, Roundalay. I had transcribed his solo note for note and worked so hard to get his phrasing and tried to play just like him. And afterward, he like smiled and laughed and clapped, and he was like, "That was amazing. What was that?"
And this story sort of continues, right? Because you kept working on that piece.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I kept playing the piece and it became this like core competition piece. But it was something that, for those 3 years, this piece was something I played almost every single day because I was trying to hone it and perfect it. My dad used to talk to me about winning competitions and being the best, quote unquote, and all this stuff. And at some point, we got into a fight because jazz became more about expression and me expressing myself. And so, like, this piece went from me playing it note for note as Oscar Peterson played it or as best as I could to me making it my own.
I'm curious to hear a little bit more even about that conflict with your dad. How did that work out between the two of you?
It was a fight in the moment. Like, it was a moment where he basically was like, you are deciding that you don't want to be great, essentially. Because like the way that we would work together, because we worked on these pieces for competitions, was how can I basically craft this like incredibly impressive demonstration of my abilities. And I had teachers who showed me that jazz improvisation was about expressing yourself in the moment. And that became my North Star. But because I was having to try to figure out how to express myself in the moment, the skills I had on the surface took a dive. And so my dad, he was essentially like, you're making a mistake. Let me know when you realize you made a mistake and you can come back to me and we'll work it out. It wasn't until I was just a successful musician and was like touring and won the Monk competition and like all these other things that I think my dad was like, I guess the way that you went about it was like the right way to go about it. I think that it took him a long time to feel like I didn't make a mistake, but a lot of that was just his nervousness about wanting me to succeed, essentially.
It's time for a quick break. When we come back, Kris's career takes off, in part thanks to a fateful run-in with one of the greatest musicians of all time. Stay with us.
I think San Francisco just has a lot of weird, smart, crazy people, and it's really exciting. There's a lot of innovation going on. There are definitely problems, but this whole mix together makes it endlessly interesting. I'm Zara Stone. I'm a culture reporter at The Standard, and here culture really covers like tech culture, startups, work-life balance, wellness, and underground robot boxing. When I'm thinking about stories, I kind of look for things that are unusual, that will delight, that will inform. I think our audience is really smart, and so they're expecting high caliber reporting and wanting us to go a little deeper and further. I think if you value really good reporting and stories that are more than surface level, supporting The Standard is a great way to support local journalism. Join at sfstandard.com/membership.
I understand that another one of your musical mentors was the one and only Aretha Franklin. How did you first discover her music?
The first time I heard her music is probably going back to my parents and records and things like that. But, I had this mentor named Mulgrew Miller, who's another one of the greatest jazz pianists of all time. And he told me about Aretha's record, Amazing Grace. And he was like, I always have 3 copies on me, one in my car, one in my briefcase, and one at home. That's how much this record means to me. And just the electricity and vibration in that church that you can hear when you listen to this record, it's like a live album if you haven't heard it. I mean, it's a gospel album, but there's like a sacred aspect to it, even beyond the religious connotation that feels so palpable when you listen to the music. And so I remember listening to that record on repeat over and over and over again. I didn't grow up going to church very often. Like, my parents were not very religious, and like they came from tumultuous religious backgrounds. But the thing I was connected to as a musician was the music, especially in churches like this, where like I really believed that Aretha's not singing in that moment for ego reasons or trying to impress people. It's like trying to reach this other thing that I feel like is, to me, what makes that kind of music so powerful.
And I believe there's a story about you meeting Aretha at the Monk competition, which you mentioned earlier. Can you tell me about that competition and that story of meeting her?
Yeah, so there's an organization that's now called the Herbie Hancock Institute that was called the Thelonious Monk Institute. They have a yearly competition. Every year it's a different instrument, and people from all around the world up to the age of 30 can apply to it. And they pick top 3 people with a winner that wins a record deal and a certain cash prize. It's pretty notable in the jazz space. Like, all the jazz legends are there for the concert. They're part of the judging panel. After I won, we went to the White House and met Obama in the Oval Office. Like, it's a pretty, it felt for me like a pretty life-changing
It's a big deal,
event.
yeah.
And so when I did the competition in 2011, I believe, after I performed, somebody comes up to me and says, like, do you mind meeting someone really quickly? And I was like, yeah, sure, I guess. And as we're walking to the front, they're like, by the way, it's Aretha Franklin that wants to meet you. And I remember seeing her with her whole entourage and being speechless and not knowing what to say or how to articulate how much she meant to me and how much her music meant to me. And she was just like, you're my favorite. I hope you win. I hope you do well. But we didn't really interact the rest of the weekend. And then maybe a week later, I get a call from a number I didn't recognize. I pick up the phone and this woman starts speaking to me. She was like, so what did you think of the competition? And I was like, it was great. Like, I feel great that I won. And she was like, okay, like, how do you feel about the record deal that you get from the competition? And in my head, I'm like, who is this? Like, what do you want? And then she was like, do you think you'll be happy with Concord Records? So I was like, yeah. And then she was like, okay, well, if you're not happy with them, like, you can always sign to Aretha Records. And I was like, oh. I was like, oh, is this Miss Franklin? She's like, yes. And then she was like, so what's your plan? Do you have a manager? And I was like, no, I don't. She was like, well, your first manager should be your biggest cheerleader. They should be like your publicist. I think you should work with my publicist. And I was like, okay, great. She became my manager for the next few years. And then all of a sudden, Aretha asked me to play for a birthday party. Then it was a Christmas party. Then it became an annual birthday party that I played for. She would ask me what I was practicing. She would ask me about like what classical pieces I play. And like, she was just a sponge when it came to information about the piano, which I thought was amazing as someone who's a legendary singer, how incredible of a piano player she was and how much she worked at that.
It's an incredible story. You mentioned this a little bit earlier around when your dad sort of came around to like, okay, actually, Kris got it right. You became a working musician. And your next song takes us to that time. It's Death Cab for Cutie's Passenger Seat. And I know the story attached to this song is a heavy one. Why'd you choose it?
Yeah, so by the time I was 22 or 23, I lived in New York, but I was only home for maybe at the most a week at a time. And most of the time I was touring. And then, like I said, winning the competition came with a record deal. And so I put out a record a few years later and then started touring with my own band. And also at this time, I started getting into film scoring and I was like scoring my films while I was on tour. But when I started touring with my band, my guitarist, my friend Adam, he was just the person that kind of got me musically the most. And we talked about playing more pop songs in our repertoire. And so we put together a set list and this was one of the songs that he recommended that we play. And so we played it regularly in our set. But then maybe like, I'd say a year into us touring together, his girlfriend at the time surprisingly was diagnosed with cancer. And eventually she passed away. And I remember being on a trip with my girlfriend at the time, and Adam called me and told me Alicia had passed away. And it was such a huge shock to me. But a couple months later, after like we had some time to move through that as best as we could, we had a show and we played that song at the show. And I remember the whole band, all of us being incredibly emotional, like crying while we were playing, because we all were very aware of how much we were playing for her.
The darkest country road and the strong scent of evergreen from the passenger seat as you are driving me home.
So it was an emotional moment, but also like really really beautiful. I think that's the amazing thing about music is how much it can encapsulate feeling or a time, and like the fact that this piece of music that like probably means something so different to so many people, to me now has this very, very specific meaning, and like that I can hear that song and be taken to a very specific point in time. And I feel like that's the amazing thing about music in general, and like all these songs we've been talking about is how much it is a time machine.
Your last song is connected to your wife, Brianna. It's To Build a Home by the Cinematic Orchestra. What's the story here?
My wife and I, one of the first things we connected on was music. Like we met on Bumble, and we started talking on the app or texting, and it was kind of one of those like joking, here's a test because I'm a musician, like what kind of music do you listen to, because that needs to be solved now. And she started telling me tracks and like records I had never heard of, and I was like, well, these are actually really dope. But this was a song that she mentioned early on in our relationship that meant a lot to her, and I had heard it before, and I really loved the Cinematic Orchestra because I felt like it was this great balance of like cinematic music and also like more pop music sensibilities. But as we've grown as a family, like now we're married, now we have 2 kids, this piece of music I think feels, and the idea behind it just feels different to me. I do a lot of filming of our home life, and we go to the Huntington and Descanso Gardens like once a week. And I was cutting together this footage of like her pregnant and my daughter playing around the gardens, and I put this song on there, and all of a sudden I just was like bawling watching this video, because it just thinking about when my wife and I almost 10 years ago had just met, and like this idea of what the song meant, and now what this song means to us specifically, and like what it represents in this home that we have built is even more special. And the footage is actually my daughter building these little things with sticks and stuff like that. So it just was, yeah, it felt right.
Your parents guided you towards a career in music from such a young age. Any thoughts on whether you want to do the same for your kids?
I'm very hesitant to. Like, I feel like there's so many people that have this story of their parents made them do it and then they resented them and stopped doing it, that like I'm careful to not push them into it. So it's probably inevitable that they'll be creative because they hear me playing piano all the time. So I think that they will probably do it, and they already seem to love music, but I will be much more encouraging than forceful.
You've clearly had such a high sense of purpose since you were a kid. Has becoming a father changed your relationship to your career in any way?
Oh, yeah, for sure. One, just made it clear, like, how much my identity as just a person in the world and in my family and in life is so much higher than my identity as a composer. I think that, like, before having kids, it felt like that's all I was as a composer, and, like, that's all I thought about. Like, I feel like I lived and died by how people responded to my music, how successful I was, or any of that kind of stuff. And now work is obviously incredibly important to me because of how much it's a part of me and a part of my expression, but kids just don't care about what you're doing. Like, I could be very stressed about a deadline and come upstairs and my daughter is like, are you going to make horsey talk? Because, like, that's all I care about right now.
And what is horsey talk?
She's in this phase right now where, like, all her animals need to talk to her, and like she would much rather have a conversation with her stuffed animals than me. So it's like her talking, like explaining to Horsey like why she can't have lights on at night, and like why, like all these different things. But we go on a walk with our dog, and I have to talk like our dog. Like, so like the demand to be very present and put work aside is very helpful. In addition to, like, the emotional depth that experience in my life brings to whatever I'm trying to express through the music on these projects as well. I feel like those two things are the biggest ways that they've changed.
Kris, thank you so much for sharing your 7 songs.
Thank you, Sophie. Really appreciate it.
Life in 7 Songs is a production from the San Francisco Standard. This episode was produced by me and Tessa Kramer, and it was mixed by me, Sophie Behrman. Our theme music is by Kate Davis and Zubin Hensler. Jess Hutchison created our show art. Our music consultant is Sarah Tembekshan. Thank you for listening.